Thank you so much for joining us, Thomas. I've been meaning to talk to you about a lot of things, so there's a great chance. When you just recently wrote that you were moving on to your next thing, you've been leading the science directorate for 6 years now, is that right?
Yeah.
When you wrote that you were moving on, you said that you had a chance to implement some of your best ideas. What were some of those ideas?
So first of all, many of the ideas had to do with what we just heard, which is the recognition that innovation and entrepreneurship is one of the strongest forces, I would say, in the US ecosystem. It's a real differentiator that relates to leadership. And so what we did at NASA's science program is create a number of partnerships and taking advantage of opportunities that nobody was taking advantage of before. So for example, we have a program now that buys data from constellations of spacecraft that are imaging the Earth and makes those data available to scientists around the United States and beyond. We also have a partnership with a bunch of companies, frankly leftovers from the Google X Prize, that we're trying to get to the surface of the moon with. The reason I'm saying trying is because we haven't done it yet. The CEO of iSpace was here before,
yeah, he's great.
Our Japanese colleague, right, who I'm really excited about because he's sitting on top. His lander is sitting on top of a rocket right now as we speak, and we hope he's going to go there. We have three more landing attempts on the surface of the moon in the next 12 months based on these commercial companies. Those are two of many.
Well, there's certainly more, but as you mentioned, this is like sort of a major trend running through your tenure is bridging that gap between the private or the commercial world and the government side of things. What sort of setbacks did you have attempting to do that? When you say, okay, well, we should be able to buy data from Planet or whoever and just use it in our mission or to inform our models. You know, who says no and why do they say no?
Well, it's frankly, you read the books on innovation, and I have a lot of stories that could be in a book like this.
You should write a book.
So who knows, right? First, I'm going skiing.
Yes. We'll talk about that later.
But if you look at disruptive innovation, for example, and there's a lot of work that has been done on that. One of the real sources of antibodies come from the direction of the status quo. So there is this one, and it's not because people are bad, right? Many people always mix up. There's not good and bad. These struggles are not about good and bad. They're about old and new. And they're not the same, right? Good and bad. There's many things that have we have a lot of history on that are good. Old is not always bad, right? I'm much more convinced of that as I get older. Do you know what I mean? So basically, the struggle here is one person says, wait, we used to build all these spacecraft, and now we're just buying data. Is that actually the right thing to do? Somebody says, wait, when we built the spacecraft, the calibration of these data are much, much better than what we're buying. Are these data actually useful? And so it's those kind of questions that come up, that relate to this. There's a whole machinery that has to help make that happen, right? So you have to figure out what the right procurement vehicles are, because what you don't want to do is come up with a vehicle that actually kills the very spark of innovation that actually differentiates it, right? So you solve a lot of problems, and the way you think about it is it's really a journey, right? When it comes to these innovative programs, it's not a single day, a single decision. It's a journey, and frankly, very likely you're going to fail a few. And you have to be open to that. I think Sebastian Thrun, once said, innovation and iteration always go together. And I like the word iteration because it's so much easier to take than failure. But that's what we mean. Innovation and iteration goes together. So I'll tell you one thing, for example, that absolutely did not work. So we have a number of experiments that did not work. Here's one. We actually said, hey, let's start launching spacecraft together with commercial spacecraft, just hang from the side of it and go, for example, to geostationary orbit and observe the Earth from there. It's pretty hard to get to geostationary orbit. Let's do that, right? Well, what happened is we set up all these competitions. We have a number of amazing instruments, and then the geo market crashed.
Yeah.
And it crashed because of the spectrum auction, 5G, that cleared out spectrum. So all the companies that launched through GEO basically said, hey, we need to be done by the end of this year, launching, right, to get these enormous billion-dollar incentives. And by the way, there's a LEO market that opened up with a variety of constellations. And so basically, I'm sitting on these instruments, right? And I'm having a hard time launching them. And I think over time, the innovation sphere will come up with a solution like satellite as a service, right? Kind of, I want to attach my instrument to a standard bus, go move and go fast, right? But that market is not there yet, kind of in a way that is, I would say, worth for the taxpayer, right? So I'm sitting on payloads that should be in space.
Yeah, we all have that problem now and then. I feel like this is, you've mentioned this, how like a spectrum auction caused the GEO market to crash, which caused this to happen, which caused this to happen. It's very difficult to figure out this sort of diagram of interactive pieces here. And I think that's something that investors try to do a lot as well. There's a lot of overlap here in how you quantify and prioritize. And so when you have a budget or a certain amount of launches, how do you quantify and prioritize the programs that are all jockeying for position of like, well, we really need to get back to Mars, and we really should go to Venus. We really ought to do this and that and the other thing. Is there a process? Do you just trust your advisors?
So the way I deal with risk, let's talk about that first, and I'm going to talk about the topical areas. But the way I deal with risk is really, the way I think about it, it's very much like your investment portfolio or mine, right? And if you want some upside, you need to have some risky elements. And frankly, it's important that we communicate to all stakeholders that those elements are risky. And so when we did the Commercial Lunar Payload Services program, I went and told everybody on the Hill, everybody in the White House, it's a 50-50 chance of success. And I've never backed off. Because what I don't want to do is say 80, and then I need to prove it. Now, proving that adds a lot of bureaucracy I don't want to add to those companies. So by basically saying it's risky and defending that it's a good idea that it's risky is creating the opportunities for that experiment to blossom. By the way, it's not clear that that experiment will work. It may be that somebody sits on this stage in a few years and say it didn't work because of X. But my full belief is we need to do the experiment and go through. So kind of, I think part of that risky part needs to change relatively quickly. And frankly, I'm not a believer that overanalysis really gets better results on those things. It's better to do just like a seed fund or a pre-seed fund to kind of work on two ideas and then down select and go with the one, and instead of overanalyze kind of with market and all this stuff, when the business model is not clear from the companies.
Gotcha, that's interesting.
The other piece, kind of how do you figure out destinations and so forth? Well, there's some things that are my job, there's some things that are not my job. That is not my job. So what we're doing, and I think it's the right thing to do, is that we're asking the top scientists in the United States and beyond to help identify what the most urgent science is in a 10-year strategy in every one of those fields. We're spending money on the academies to do that, and frankly, we're using those to prioritize. And the reason we're doing that is we don't want to work on Thomas's program or whoever is there before, John's who was there before, or whoever comes later. We want to work on a program that has the most impact. And that should be defined by the science output if you're running a science program. So that's what we're doing with those investments. So really, Mars sample return, we did because of that. No other reason. Kind of the observations of the Earth in the future, we're doing because of that.
Obviously, we're on the cusp of a huge change in the location and kind of science we can do with the Artemis program. What new opportunities do you think are important, that an enduring presence on the moon and in cislunar space? What does that provide for us?
So I see kind of three opportunities that are really opening up. The first one is just amazing science from the moon. Many people think, hey, we've been at the moon, we know that body. Oh no, we're going forward to a moon that is very different than what we had before. What we think today about the moon is almost fundamentally different in many of the domains than what we thought about when we left it. So there's amazing science, and frankly, what's so exciting to me is amazing scientists that are doing this. It was always easy to find the lunar session in a conference. It's just the old guys who talked about Apollo. And basically what's happening with Artemis and what's happening with commercial lunar payload services, we have an incredibly rich, diverse, kick-ass community ready to do science, right? So that's that. I think the second piece is really about resource utilization. I think by going there more sustainably, we can start thinking about doing things that were the stuff of dreams, like can we get water out of the surface? Can we make fuel out of it there? Can we make an outpost of humanity at the moon as we're heading towards Mars? Because that's where we want to be. I don't want to get stuck on the moon. And the third piece I think is really interesting, and that is that there's really new modalities of science that is very different from the science kind of in the first bucket that kind of, if you want, use robotic and human explorers in a coherent and integrated fashion. And we've never done that. I mean, on Apollo, the science kind of was flying around along with it, I mean, on Apollo, kind of the, Buzz Aldrin, after Neil Armstrong got off the ladder and he set up this little aluminum foil to collect, solar wind that was blown off from the sun, and kind of it embedded itself, and the noble gases were measured on the ground. By the way, in the institute where I got my PhD. So even though I grew up in Switzerland, like was said, the Apollo program affected me. So it's opportunistic science, important science, but opportunistic science. So we have done amazing robotics. Look what we're doing at Mars today, and in many of the other kind of robotic platforms. We have not integrated those. And if you start doing that, you can start getting into modalities. And I know there's some kind of scientists and psychologists and leaders who are starting to think about it. How do we use robots and humans together for maximum output, right? So think of a rover on the surface of the moon that can operate either driven or totally autonomously. How do we get the maximum science, the maximum impact out of that, knowing that 95% of the time there's no astronaut sitting on that chair?
Yeah.
Right? So it's that kind of new modality. Now, we have not, it's the way I think about human exploration and robotics still is almost like two tribes that are meeting for the first time, right? It's kind of, so it's really kind of, it's almost a cultural divide that we need to overcome, that then bring together, and so it's that third bucket. If I was entirely new in the career early on, I would really look at that because I think it's super exciting. It's also super exciting because you can transfer the lessons back on Earth because many other problems relate to that as well. Firefighting, of course, Department of Defense has problems that work the same way, and we can transfer things back and forth.
You've mentioned several times a sort of clash of cultures. It's not necessarily a clash, but a mix, and the mix is uneven, and it's not quite sure how it's going to play out. How do but you mentioned, like, you used to be, you would find the old guys talking about Apollo. Now, the Artemis program is diverse and young and full of scientists of all stripes from all over the world. How do you build a team like that? How do you attract talent at a time like now when there is enormous competition over the sort of the brains, or the hot young brains that, I don't know why I put it like that, but the intellectual talent in this country and beyond.
So I want to quickly talk about the lunar community. This week alone, I've been contacted by Jack Schmidt, who advocated on behalf of the early career scientists of the lunar program. So when I talk about diversity, I'm including the old people. I just want to make sure that that's what I'm talking about. And they together are building the community that we need because we don't want to lose the lessons. We don't want to start at Adam and Eve. We want to take all these lessons there. I think, look, one of the key insights and kind of organizations like around this conference really realize that there's no leadership without innovation. There is no leadership without innovation, which means, kind of if you think about that, change is ever present. And as a leader, if it's too comfortable for everything, and I don't care who you are, I don't care which company you are, if you're getting too comfortable, you will not be a leader for long. And kind of the anecdote I'll tell you is I was in a room with Larry Page, the founder of Google, one of the founders of Google, and I will never forget what he said in that room. It was about a product, had to do with Earth imaging, and all that doesn't matter so much. But what he said in the room, when he made the statement, he basically said, many people mix up what leadership is, he said. Many people think of it as on some number, this number is larger than this number. Percentage of search in the world. Google is number one, this other browser is number two. And he basically said, that is not leadership. It's that, but more importantly, the first derivative of that number. How fast that number is changing. Because you could be up here, and you could be cruising along, and back down here is a person that, or a company, or a competitor, or another entrant into the market, and you don't even think, they're not even on my, oh, I'm so good, they're not even close to me. But they're moving like this. It's a matter of time, and they will overtake you.
Or you buy them.
Or you buy them, which in the commercial sector you can do. So I think for me, when you talk about innovation, and I have my strong believer that much innovation, besides from that attitude, as from the leadership perspective, comes from the talent you put in a room. And I want to tell you, one of the most heartbreaking meetings, I joined NASA, and it's a proud agency, they're amazing people, but one of the most heartbreaking meetings I went to was early when I joined NASA. I was in a room, and I realized that we made decisions really quickly, and I realized that we didn't talk about the issues. And I looked around, and I figured out, well, basically all the people in the room that spoke, there were other people in the room, but they never spoke. All the people who spoke in the room had roughly the same background, all the same gender, roughly the same age group, mine or older, right? And I'm like, wow, we are not challenging ourselves, right? So for me, one of the things I started doing is I visited people in their offices, right? And I basically said, and I know it freaked some of the people out because it's like, that's creepy. One person just told me, just last week, that was really creepy. I said, look, you sat here for a month, you spoke 3 times. So I have a photographic memory, I can remember what you said. Or in a meeting, I will know, right? So that helps me sometimes, but it makes me creepy in other times. Anyway, so you spoke 3 times. Every time you spoke, it mattered. You made the place better, but the problem is you're not speaking enough because the team could be better if you spoke. The other meeting in the office is like, hey, do you ever realize, you're one of the most experienced people at NASA. Do you ever realize that after you speak, nobody speaks? So I need you to speak, but later. Because I want the other ideas on the table. And by the way, I'm sick in your hospital too. So you're going to stop me from cutting out the discussion too. And so together we're going to make the team better. So over time, what that does, that small intervention, it creates that. Then you realize, wait, we don't have all the voices in the room. We need people who have more experience with innovation. Let's get them. Let's go hire them. Oh, we're missing, we want to build research programs that are for all universities, not just the tier ones. Well, we need some people who went to minority serving organizations and so forth. Let's bring them into the room. And so together, we get better. So in that sense, diversity is not the icing on the cake, it's the cake. Mm-hmm. It's building the best teams that we can. So that's really one of those things I learned.
One of those skills that you picked up, you mentioned in your update that you like to learn new skills. Do you still learn new skills? It feels like you've been at this for a little while. You haven't learned them all yet?
Oh, hell no. Frankly, if I stop learning, I get really bored. And the other thing that I do is I make my own problems. So so for me, I really like the feeling that I'm learning something, and frankly, even today, I spent an hour at JPL with one of the innovation leaders there, and he told me what's wrong. And I'm like, wow, those are really profound insights. This is how we should think about it, and how do we empower talent more, right? In a system that wants to become a bureaucracy every time you turn around, right? How do we create that spark and keep it alive and have a sense of urgency getting better? So I learned that this morning. I'm going to think about it a lot, and I want every day to have a lesson like that.
So how are you going to handle taking time off?
I'm actually worried about it.
Oh, yeah?
So I think first thing I'm going to do is take some ski classes because I could be a better skier. But joking aside, what I'm going to do, I already made my daily schedule. I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to get up, hit the first chair, and then I'm going to get done before noon. And I'm going to start writing
Oh, really?
things I learned. And I'm going to write not because because I necessarily want you to read or other people. It's just because I think when I write. So I really want to try to figure out what I learned and make sure that things I don't know yet, that I figure out what they are. And then, I'm going to figure out what's next. So then I'll go to the gym again, and then I'll meet friends or start talking with people. So that's what I'm going to do.
Alpine or telemark?
Oh, Alpine. I wish I was as cool as a telemarker, but I'm not.
I guess they are cool. It's something you could learn, I guess.
Yeah.
So you're not going to build a robotic space station like Steve is going to do over at Quantum Space?
No, at this moment in time, I don't have any such plans. We'll see what's going to happen. Needless to say, I'm not done. So I'm going to figure out where to put my energy. And I'm a very purpose-driven guy. Actually, I've never asked anybody for salary. And it turns out, the biggest decisions in my life are all salary cuts. So, taking the NASA job, I hate to break to you, is not a good deal financially, right? And frankly, never regretted it, right? I don't own my house, I rent because I cannot afford owning a house there, and I could with my previous salary. But frankly, I think that's perfectly good also for my kids to see that purpose and money, they're not the same.
Well, that's a very profound insight. In a more practical sense, you were at NASA during obviously a pandemic and a bunch of these sort of disruptions to the workforce. I talked with Steve a little bit about this, but how did the sort of this shift to remote work and the shift to having teams scattered all over the place, how did that change the sort of nature of collaboration? I know how important that is in a lab, in a research environment.
So I actually think when COVID happened, first of all, I sent all my team home before I was allowed to, because it was clear what's going to happen. And it's like, we said, I was because of my mandatory service in Switzerland, I was a military guy, so I knew that you first check all the comm system before you go spread in the world. So we were the only team that was fully functional on day one,
wow.
Right? Because we actually prepared for that. So I was never more proud of what we did the first few weeks. Right? And we can talk about whether we did the right thing as a country. That's actually not my point at all. But with the boundary conditions we had, I was never more proud because we came together immediately, started communicating. I made everybody read the Shackleton book on endurance. This is how you deal with an ambiguous leadership, situation. So we did that. I actually think where we are right now, even though the electronics work and all this stuff, we're actually in a really difficult situation. And not just at NASA, the whole industry. And what we've been doing is we've basically used a belief system that talking on Zoom or Teams is taking care of interpersonal contacts. And what we're missing, I think, is, COVID was not so much bringing new things, it was an accelerator of what is already there.
Of course.
That good leaders became better, weak leaders really got exposed. And what we're seeing is a shift in the industry to a younger, interesting workforce, but has different perhaps values in some of the areas or different behaviors than what was there. And we realized we just missed a launch with Psyche, and we did a independent review. We see really big gaps that we have in our organizations now, and I see them in all of the industry. It's not just at NASA, not just in one place. We are not as strong as we were before. We're not connected as people. Our trust budgets are depleted, and we need to really make changes. So the electronics works just fine. And by the way, I'm not advocating that we go back to pre-COVID. That would be idiotic. We learn a lot of things that we don't want to forget. At the same time, we can't be in a situation where we say, you decide how you want to work, and whether you can do the work at home. If you're a writer, which you are, and you're a good one, or a great one, right? That's different than if somebody says, we're building a spacecraft together, and I'm asking a senior member, is on your checklist, I will mentor 10 people when you call it in, or as an early career people, is on your checklist, I will be mentored, I'll learn about the culture of this organization. Of course, it's on nobody's checklist, so we're depleting these things. So I think we're nowhere near done with this transition that we have, and I think it's really important to carefully learn about how we become the best team we can be.
Indeed. Well, we only have about 2 minutes left, and I wanted to get to some of the actual projects and some of the things you're interested in. So a little lightning round here. UAPs, formerly known as UFOs, there is a new study of them at NASA right now. How's that going?
Oh, it's going well. I mean, I think that tools of science are good for all problems, and we should not walk away from problems that we get beat up on Twitter. I want to tell you, you gain a lot of Twitter followers if you start at NASA a UAP study, so there.
Yeah, well, I mean, nobody's expecting little green men, but like, what do you hope to learn? Do you find a new kind of cloud or something? I'm not sure.
Look, I mean, whenever you have something that we cannot explain, let's go at it with the tools of science. I want to make this a data-rich place, and let's learn what can be learned. We will learn some things. Perhaps it's about cameras, perhaps it's about nature, perhaps it's something really much bigger, but we need to be open for all of these, but let data drive what we're thinking as opposed to some prejudice.
Gotcha, yeah. And on that note, life beyond Earth, do you think it exists, and where would we find it? And would it be really weird, or would it be like us?
So as a scientist, I don't know, right? But I really do believe, I look at these amazing pictures of the James Webb Space Telescope,
yes,
and the universe is even bigger than it was before. And of course, every one of those stars has at least one planet. We learned that 5 years ago, like these statistics. And look at the night sky. That's how many planets there are, at least. And so each one of them is going through a chemical evolution, and why shouldn't it turn into biology? And in our neighborhood, we're looking at Mars as a place. There's really interesting things that we're finding. We're looking at Europa. We're looking at Enceladus potentially. Titan we're going to go visit. So we have places around here. And then, of course, we're looking at exoplanets using the James Webb and other tools. So it's all of the above. It's one of those, where do you look? All of the places. That's what we want to do.
For a start. Well, that is our time. Thank you very much for joining us. And you're very insightful. Thank you.